Custom settings for the Sony FX6, that's what we're talking about in this video. I did a video before talking about the Sony FX9, my Sony FX9, and my settings for that. So how do I use it and how do I set it up? And I also gave you guys a file to download that you could put on an SD card and you could configure your camera the same way or use it as a starting point. So I want to go over kind of a similar process with the Sony FX6. So what I've learned over the last month or so of shooting with this has really helped me to kind of figure this out. And I'll just show you here on the other camera here, the same kind of similar things you can do to the FX9, you can do with the FX6. So you can preset a lot of your buttons that are on here. There is less buttons than the FX9, but there is still a good amount of buttons that you can preset. So I'm going to show you guys what I have set mine up to. I'm also going to show you again how you can add these files to your own camera and easily download them to put them onto your camera. Now the one big difference, or sort of big difference between the two cameras, and the one thing you need to be careful of, if you're using these presets and then you're using the settings where I show you how to save your user settings so you can quickly move between different formats on the camera. With this camera, because it's either using these, I'll show you guys on the side here, I'm using a lot of the CF Express Type A cards here, if it focuses on that, just for the faster speeds with this camera. And if you're using that or you're using SD cards, you can't be using both at the same time. You could be using one SD card and one of these, but you can't be using them both. The interesting thing with that is that there's not another slot you can have where you can just be loading in your presets, or you can be giving somebody else's presets and easily doing that like you have on the Sony FX9. You have your XQD card slots and you have another SD slot, and that SD slot, really the main function of that is to be able to load your LUTs to and to be able to load your user presets or save your user presets to. And you could just give somebody else an SD card if you're shooting with a multi-camera, the same cameras with the FX9, you can give somebody else your presets. They can easily put it into their camera. Cameras can be matching really quickly. It's also, as I show in that video, a great way to go through some of the different things instead of going into the menu and digging down to change to the different resolutions or frame rates or color looks that you want to have. So when you do it on here, it saves to the SD card or the CF Express card, whatever you're choosing to use. And it saves a file. Okay, so I'm going to show you on the computer here. This file, this is the file I have uploaded. You have to use this in this same root directory. It has to be this file here. It has to be, say, camera. The file needs to be in there. There's a folder for LUTs. There's a folder for your presets. And when you download it, you just add that to your card you have. Now, what you need to do, though, is when you want to keep using that and you want to be using that over and over again, is that you have to format your cards a little bit differently. You can't be formatting your cards in camera because it erases everything off the card. What I recommend you doing is after you've transferred the footage off your card, you can then just transfer the one folder that has all your footage into it, just transfer that into your trash, delete that. That gets all that stuff off your card, but it leaves the information that you've saved on your cards, your user presets, on a card, and I'm just doing that in all my cards. So it's just that I have that there, it's easy, and it shows up. Okay, so let's go through the settings I have on this Sony FX9 now, how I custom set up my buttons on the body of the camera. So we'll start off with the S and Q button. That is still set to the same as it is through what it comes out of the thing. It's set to your S and Q, your slow or quick settings to quickly jump over to those things. I've left it the same. The next one down is the button for number 2. Now I have set that to be your transition speed. So I can go in there quickly and I can change how fast the transition speed is. And that's the transition speed for the autofocus. Philip Bloom did a thing like this for his A7S III, which I'm shooting on as my B cam here, and it showed why it is good to play around with that stuff. He has some great stuff on autofocus. So it is a nice thing to be able to do, to change how fast and how responsive your autofocus is and how fast it try to move to something else. So I like having that as a button that I can quickly play with and change. And I'm typically keeping my autofocus transfer speed to 1, to the slowest setting. Okay, so the next one down, 3, and I have this actually the same on my FX9. I have this, which is, you know, technically not the dual ISO, but it is sort of the dual ISO. That jumps into the higher base ISO because on the number 3 there, just a quick, easy way for me to go from 800 ISO to 12,800 ISO, I believe what it is, 12,800. So the next one is display. Display is on or off. That is not something you can program. The ones after that I have changed as well. There's ones on the side of the monitor of the camera. So you have them right here on the side of the monitor. And I've changed this one to be my focus area, and I've found that very convenient. You can go back and forth between the different flexible zone, wide zone, and zone. And this one is my zebras, which I think is what it's already set to. And then your peaking, which is automatically there. On the other side, you have a couple other custom buttons that you can do. I'm keeping the magnification the same. The magnification only works on the actual monitor or monitor that's on the camera itself. It doesn't go over HDMI or over SDI. It doesn't punch in that way, but it is still helpful for me to have on. Those are the custom settings I have done to the camera. They're not, again, there's less buttons on the Sony FX6 than there is in the FX9, so there's less things you can custom set that way. But internally, there's some more things you can do on your user profile. You can be adding your different things in there that you would like to use all the time, and this is what I have custom set up as well. I'm just going to show you guys on the FX6 if you're having problems getting into the full menu. When you first hit menu on the side of the camera, down here is the menu. Get this in focus there. Menu button is there. I click menu, it jumps over to this screen. This screen is just a screen where you can be using as a touch screen thing to go through the different elements. If you want to get to the full menu, you need to click it, hold down on menu for a couple seconds, and then it jumps over into the full menu. So from in here, you'll see my user setups, and what I have done is I have added a thing in here for all file, which is what we're going to be talking a bit more through on my settings and what I've saved that you can load off of the cards here. My next one down is my record format. That's something I go in and change quite a bit, so I can change my frame rates here. I can change full frame or S35. Just a note, if you want to shoot in the 35mm crop or crop mode on this camera, it only does so in 1080p. In HD, you can't be doing it in 4K, so you can't crop into the sensor and still be getting a 4K out. It's a little disappointing to me. I wish you could, because it just makes things, some lenses a bit more versatile, because you're going to get a bit more range on some of the lenses that you have because you're cropping in the sensor, but that does not work on this. You can change your codec here. You can change your video format, and if you're using RAW, you can change your RAW outputs on there. So that's onto this. You can go back here. My base settings is, are you shooting Cine EI, which is your S-Log3, or are you shooting in custom, which will be your S-Cinetone, or I have set to S-Cinetone. Those are the two things that I am shooting one or the other in. Okay. The one after that, I have my slow and quick here. Why I have it here, you also have on the side. On the side button of the camera, you cannot change your actual frame rates. You can only change that it's on or off. So to be able to change your frame rates, one of the ways I do that is going into here, and then I could change and make it more or less. There is also a thing if you want to go to 4K 120 or anything over 4K 60, you need to be in the UHD, I think it's called UHD, that smaller size file format for doing HD, or sorry, 4K. That little bit smaller frame size. Otherwise, you cannot go more than 60 frames per second in 4K, but this is how you can get over, and you can do change this over to 120 frames per second. Okay, so we go back out of here. Steady shot, I don't have steady shot turned on this lens, but also have it on here. I want to make sure I always have steady shot turned off for 90% of the stuff I'm doing, because I'm using Catalyst Browse so often. It's important for me to make sure I have steady shot turned off, otherwise you cannot, or it does not work in Catalyst Browse. Again, it's another video I have gone more in depth onto. Interval recording, this is doing time-lapse recording, and I can quickly get in here, my ISO or gain, my focus areas. The next one down, this is for if you want to record to both cards at the same time. You can click on here and turn that on, or I keeping it off for most of the time. Assignable buttons, this is where you can go in and change where your assignable buttons are. Again, this is what I have added to my user menu. This is not default right out of the thing. So if you download my presets and you put it onto your camera, onto your card, SD card, or your CF Express Type A card, you'll be able to get to these things quickly, just as I'm explaining it here. So you can, this is where you can change all your assignable buttons, your assignable dial, your multi-function dial. This is where you can also change to put your LUTs on or off. So on this camera, you need to load the LUTs you want to use to the camera. And what I've learned, that once they're loaded to the camera, and I've tried this, and you take your SD cards out, you don't have them on your SD cards or the CF Express cards that you're using, it still remembers that information in the camera, which is great. I don't know why it doesn't allow you to save user presets internally to the camera as well. I wish it did, but for LUTs, it does. Cine EI settings, clip name. So sometimes I'll go in here and I'll reset my numbers and set my clip name. Formatting your cards. Now this is what I talked about earlier. If you do want to format your cards or format your media, this is where you would do that. But I would recommend, if you want to use the camera the way I'm going to be showing you here, that you do not do this, because it will erase that information and you'll have to put it back onto a SD card or a CF Express card. Menu settings, shutter speed, flicker reduction, time code, and this is where you can go and edit. So that's all my kind of basic settings there. Now I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to the very first one, which I showed you. And there's a reason why I have it loaded as first. And I'm going to go load from media. And I have it set up for media B. It can be set up to media A. As I said, I put all these presets on all my cameras, so it's always the same. So the very first one I have is FX6 Cine EI 2460. So what does that mean? Is it is what camera it is, because I like that information to know quickly. I mean, obviously I am on this camera, but you don't need to have that name in there if you don't want it there to have a bit more space. Cine EI is the S-Log3 Cine EI that I'm shooting. 24 frames per second. It's actually 23.976. And /60 means, for me, a reference for myself, that if I'm in this mode, if I hit S and Q, it will do slow motion at 60 frames per second. Okay, and so the next one below that is the same thing, but if I go to S and Q, it goes to 120 frames per second. And the one below that is the same, but it's, instead of shooting native 23.98, it is shooting native 60 frames per second. Benefit of that is, if you want to do some slow motion and shoot some overcrank stuff at 60 frames, you can capture audio this way, because you need to conform it in post after. It's not the same as the S and Q. When you shoot S and Q, and if I go to 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, you do not record any audio to the camera. So if you really want to get audio as well, this is another way to do it. I have the same three things again, except this is in the S-Cinetone. So I have S-Cine, standing for S-Cinetone, their settings, or that color profile for all three. Okay, and if I go to one of these things, let me go to the very first one. It goes execute, it loads a file. Sometimes it has to reboot the camera. It's rebooting. Camera turns off, turns back on again. And there you go. that's how long it took to turn off and come back on again, but that's what it is. You'll see here on the camera as well, if you're looking at the screen, all my settings are pretty much the same on all these things. So when you go over to them, so my preset white balance is 56K as a good starting point. My A1 is 4800, and my top one is 32. So tungsten, fluorescent, and kind of daylight. Good places to kind of start with, and then you can tweak your settings from there. Also, I always have it set to the intra recording, not the long gob recording, which will give you more time. But I'm going to show you some other things here, why I didn't make other settings for that, because there is some cool different ways now with the FX6 that you can change some of your settings. So I'm not using these custom settings as much as I was on the FX9, because I can quickly go between some things a little bit easier on the FX6 than the FX9. So let's go back into the menu here, again, switch over, go back into the user, and go into the all frame, and I'm going to show you the load the other ones that I have here. So the next one down is Cine EI HD240. So if I want to shoot the highest frame rate, the most slow-mo is 240 frames per second. Camera only does that in HD. You can't do that in 4K. So I have that set for Cine EI color profile, and I also have it set for S-Cinetone color profile. Again, the two color profiles that I'd be working with for 90% of my work. I'm going back and forth depending on what my delivery is or how quick the turnaround is. So the next one is the same thing, but for time-lapse. So I have that, was that interval recording. I'm calling it T-lapse, just a reference for myself to see what it is. So if I click on that and I say execute, so it has rebooted here, and I have it set for shooting one frame every 2 seconds. You can change that within the menu setting of the interval recording there, but that's what I have it set out as a default. And I also changed my shutter angle on this preset to 360 degrees, so I can get a lot of motion blur in my image, and I can tweak that as I need to, depending on my exposure and how much I need to ND down and all those things. But I like that, having that as a new. It also helps me to remember that, you know, I want to have a lot of motion blur or quite a bit of motion blur when I'm doing a time lapse. So that is a setting, so I can quickly get over there and do time lapse. And let's go back in here again, holding the menu down. User settings. Let's go down to the, load again. And that is it. So those are all the different settings I have on here. And again, those are a link below where you can download them. You can put them on your SD card or your CF Express card. Really simple. Load it to your camera, and you can start using those settings and have the camera body working the same way as well. Now, I just want to show you some things here on the FX6 that I like a lot better than the FX9. And now the FX9 now does have the touchscreen option, but as I was saying, because the FX6 does have better frame rate options, slow-mo frame rate options in 4K that you don't have on the FX9, it is actually easier to quick switch over to some of those things through the touch screen. On the FX9, I had a preset going because it had to go from the 6K to the 4K sensor, which is their kind of standard thing for the camera, using the full sensor. You had to go to a 5K crop to be able to get anything over 30 frames per second. So if you want to do 4K 60, you had to go in that 5K crop. So I made that as a user preset that I could easily get to. But on here, I'm going to show you what I do. So I'm going to show you now on how we're going to do that easily using the touchscreen here. So what we need to do is just hit the touchscreen or hit the media thing once. Then you can just scroll through the different options here, the different pages. You're going to see stuff for S&Q motion, face detection. There's a lot of great stuff that you can quickly do in here. Here in the page, we'll go up to the page, your audio information, which is great to see. And then we're going to go over here. We're going to see our white balance you can change right in here, your sensitivity. And if we go back here to the first page, so here I can easily change my frame rate. So if I want to do 60 frames per second with audio, I can quickly do that there. If I want to change my base ISO, I can do that there. These are the two base ISOs. If I want to change my iris, I want to change the codec, I want it's recording, I can change it in here. This actually works, I think. There's similar stuff on the FX9, but I do like a bunch of the features on this. I can change this here real quickly, so I can change the frame size there. So I can go set that, so I can easily go and do slow motion. It's going to give me information on my cards. Okay, let's go back down here. And it's a kind of a cool way to go over and change a bunch of your settings. Not everything, it's not as quick. There's some situations where I'd be using that to change some things in the camera that might be quicker than going into load for my user settings on the card and then have the camera reboot. Because some of the things here, you don't have to make the camera reboot, but when you load from your card, it will reboot. It doesn't take that long at all. It takes maybe 5 seconds or so. So for me, it's kind of a quick, easy starting place. But that's basically it. That's basically my kind of overview and kind of features and how I am setting up my FX6. Right now, I'm using the Ninja V on top here, and I'm only using this now to be recording this screen information for you guys to see that we're cutting to. Otherwise, I'm actually using a Small HD Touch 7 or the Small HD 502. Normal 502, I'm trying to get the 502 bright if that comes back in stock again. The 5-inch monitor is great on this little camera and making it more compact, but I really do like having a 7-inch monitor. I prefer having my Small HD monitors over an Atomos. I just find the colors better over Atomos, and as I'm recording always to my media in camera, so I can use Catalyst Browse for stabilization. I'm not too worried about recording to an external monitor. Also, the external monitors, the Atomos, they work great for what they do. They suck a ton of battery power, so if I'm out in the field shooting, it's another concern. It's more batteries I need to bring because it sucks way more power, and it actually does make a bit of noise. You can hear it there. They're not the most quiet monitors in the world because of, well, the processors in them. So that's my settings, guys. Let me know if there's anything I missed, if there's anything I should be talking about. In a future video, I am going to be going over my Sony 28-135. This lens here, it is a lens that's not talked about that much, and I think it's a really great lens for certain applications. But let me know, guys, in the comments below, what would you guys like me to see you talk about next? What do you like about this? What you don't like? Please give me a thumbs up. Please think of subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.